Hi there, it's Lisa Barrett, and welcome to today's presentation, The Shadows of Film Noir, a journey into cinema's darkest genre. Today I'll be exploring how this influential genre emerged, its signature style, key films, industry impact, and the lasting legacy of film noir. Our case study today, well, the film that I will be referring to the most is Double Indemnity, starring Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, directed by Billy Wilder in 1945, and generally agreed to be the quintessential example of a film noir. Which isn't just a genre. Film noir is very much a mood. It's a visual style and certainly a reflection of its time, and kind of developed out of post-war anxieties, and definitely influenced by the German expressionist cinema that had come to America post-war, and very much shaped the way Hollywood told its more cynical stories. Film noir is morally ambiguous in its characters, fatalistic in its plots, and beautiful black and white in its chiaroscuro lighting, which has definitely left an undeniable impact on modern cinema. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to look at how film noir developed, how it thrived despite Hollywood's constraints at the time, and why its influence is still felt today. And hopefully by the end, you'll see why film noir isn't just a relic of past filmmaking, but is actually quite a timeless approach to storytelling. So let's get started. I've got something to show you.
You're a smart insurance man, aren't you, Mr. Neff?
Well, I've been at it 11 years.
Doing pretty well?
Well, it's a living.
You handle just automobile insurance or all kinds?
All kinds. Fire, earthquake, theft, public liability, group insurance, industrial stuff, and so on, right down the line.
Accident insurance?
Accident insurance? Sure, Mr. Dietrichson. Wish you'd tell me what's engraved on that anklet.
Just my name.
As, for instance?
Phyllis.
Phyllis, huh? I think I like that.
But you're not sure.
Well, I'd have to drive it around the block a couple of times.
Mr. Neff, why don't you drop by tomorrow evening around 8:30? He'll be in then.
Who?
My husband. You were anxious to talk to him, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, but I'm sort of getting over the idea, if you know what I mean.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head on your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it. $8:30 tomorrow evening, then.
That's what I suggested.
Will you be here, too?
I guess so. I usually am.
Same chair, same perfume, same anklet?
I wonder if I know what you mean.
I wonder if you wonder.
Oh, I never get sick of watching Double Indemnity. I love Phyllis and I love Walter with a passion. But before we start looking closer into the stylistic features, let's just define a little bit. Film noir, French for black film, and refers to the cinematic style characterized by its look, of course, but also the moral ambiguity and crime themes and cynicism of the narrative. Though film noir wasn't an intentional movement, its dark themes and visual style became a defining period in Hollywood in the 40s and the 50s. And as I mentioned briefly before, it did emerge in response to the influence that German expressionism was having on Western cinema, with its dark contrasts, distorted angles, and the psychological depth that it had to its narrative and to the characters. Obviously indicative of a reflection of post-war anxieties at the time. But before we explore film noir in more detail, I'd like to briefly introduce you to German expressionism. No point talking about it, referring to it, if we don't know what it is. So German expressionism was a groundbreaking artistic movement that emerged in Germany during the silent era, those very early infancy years of filmmaking in the 1910s and the 1920s. German expressionism was characterized by a very dramatic, exaggerated visual aesthetic, very theatrical, a little bit experimental. with an emphasis on conveying inner emotions, the psychology behind characters through distorted, often surreal imagery. Iconic films like Metropolis and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I've got some GIFs on the slide for you to have a look at, are both prime examples using angular, abstract set designs, stark contrast of light and dark, and extreme camera angles to create a sense of unease. That would be the dominant reading anyway of all those angles, unease and psychological tension. As filmmakers from Germany fled the rise of Nazism, they brought this innovative style to Hollywood. And in America, these expressionist techniques were adapted and evolved into what we now know as film noir, which borrowed that use of those deep shadows, the high contrast lighting, and distorted perspectives, both visually and like canted angles, but also reflected in the inner turmoil and moral ambiguity of its characters. The visual language of German Expressionism allowed filmmakers to portray a world that was as psychologically complex as it was visually striking, making it a very natural precursor to the dark, brooding aesthetic of film noir. So this melding of styles helped to create a cinematic atmosphere filled with tension, isolation, and this subtext, this nuance of an ever-present sense of foreboding, foreshadowing the darkness, the bad times, the drama that was ahead. And these are all elements that have become the hallmark of film noir storytelling. And so now that we've established the origins of film noir, let's delve into its visual style, a cornerstone of the genre. Film noir is renowned for its high contrast aesthetics, where dramatic lighting, known as chiaroscuro, I'm not sure if you've heard of that term, chiaroscuro, creates stark contrasts between light and shadow. And this interplay isn't just visually striking, it mirrors symbolically the moral ambiguities and internal conflicts of its characters. But noir's signature isn't just confined to its visuals alone. The genre's complex narratives often lead to unhappy, fatalistic endings, reinforcing a worldwide view where fate and betrayal are inescapable. So these layered stories draw their audience into a murky realm where every character is faced with difficult choices and inevitable consequences. And at the heart of these narratives are archetypal characters such as the femme fatale. And this seductive yet dangerous figure uses allure to manipulate and ultimately doom the protagonist, embodying the very essence of noir's dark, cynical tone. So today we'll see how those elements, high contrast visuals, intricate, often bleak storylines, and unforgettable characters like the femme fatale combine to create an immersive, tension-filled cinematic experience that continues to influence filmmakers even now. So, high contrast aesthetics is a visual style defined by stark differences between light and dark. This technique, known as chiaroscuro, utilizes deep shadows and bright highlights to create dramatic, dynamic images that instantly engage the viewer. In film noir, high contrast visuals evoke a mystery, and tension would be the dominant reading, reinforcing themes of moral ambiguity and internal conflict. This approach not only enhances narrative depth by highlighting textures and contours, but also creates an atmospheric mood that is essential for immersive storytelling. So high contrast aesthetics can be further defined as high contrast lighting, Dutch angles, deep shadows, and urban settings. But this is not an exclusive list, and these visual conventions are probably the most traditional to the genre and the most identifiable, most well known. So we've got an example here of some high contrast lighting, some chiaroscuro from the Maltese Falcon. We have a shot of a Dutch angle or a canted tilt from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. There are some deep shadows and that Venetian blind effect, and an example of urban settings that you probably can't see because I'm in the way, but it is a rain-soaked street, as is typical of some of those locations in film noir. Chiaroscuro lighting employs stark contrasts between bright highlights and deep shadows. In film noir, this technique is central, enhancing the genre's mood and tension. By emphasizing silhouettes and hidden details, chiaroscuro conveys moral ambiguity and psychological depth. This interplay of light and darkness reflects the character's internal struggles, creating an atmosphere of mystery, dread, and inevitable tragedy in every frame. Dutch angles or Dutch tilts, which are also referred to as canted angles, are shots in which the camera is deliberately tilted, creating a slanted perspective. In film noir, the use of these angles usually interpreted with a sense of disorientation and psychological tension, reflecting the character's inner turmoil and that unstable, morally ambiguous world that they inhabit. This technique visually reinforces the narrative's dark, unpredictable atmosphere, and it powerfully disturbs modern viewer expectations. Following on, the next visual style element is deep shadows in film noir, which define its signature aesthetic. These shadows amplify tension, hint at secrets, mirror the moral ambiguity of its characters as well, and sometimes shadows obscure the reality, inviting viewers to interpret what lurks in the darkness. And this interplay of light and dark evokes a sense of foreboding, suggesting that perhaps behind every illuminated surface lies a darker truth waiting to be revealed. So I just quickly want to explain low-key lighting, which typically takes place in a studio using a single powerful key light angled at about 45 degrees to the subject or to the actors. So minimal fill behind, so it creates those deep shadows, and sometimes we might use bundles on the lights or flags or screens to control the wash, the spill of the light, so then we can enhance that contrast and produce that dramatic, mysterious atmosphere that is essential for film noir. So these deep shadows created using low-key lighting in film noir aren't just stylistic. They symbolize a dominant reading of entrapment and reinforcing that moral ambiguity theme throughout the genre. One of the most iconic, I guess, techniques is that Venetian blind effect, where you see the slatted shadows that fall across characters, creating, a sense of confinement, I guess. This signature look heightens tension and reinforces noir's themes of secrecy, deception, and impending doom. And sometimes it's not Venetian blind, sometimes it's the shadow from a rotating ceiling fan, but regardless, that deep shadow Venetian effect is probably the most iconic. And so I've quickly just scrolled through my copy of Double Indemnity and tried to find as many Venetian blind effects as I could. And as you can see, there are quite a few examples, but it is an iconic look and used a lot in film noir. So it's no surprise that Walter Neff is covered in Venetian blinds. Oh my gosh, it's just foreshadowing he's in so much trouble. So now we can move on to urban settings, which in film noir are more than just backdrops. I mean, they reflect the genre's themes of corruption, isolation, and moral decay. There are dark alleys, Rain-soaked streets, dive bars, of course, looming skyscrapers, and these all kind of create that dominant reading of a claustrophobic world where danger lurks in the shadows of the chiaroscuro lighting. Cities become characters themselves, trapping protagonists in all that crime and deceit. Often lit by overwhelming neon signs, albeit in black and white, that distinct typography that we recognize and the glow of the neon are very striking visually. I'm not sure how many of you are my vintage, but you might remember a show from the 80s called Moonlighting, starring Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. They actually did a film noir episode called The Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice, which was a bit of a pun on The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is another quite well-known film noir example. And now that we've had a look at some of the characteristics visually of film noir, I wanted to show you just a quick scene from The Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice that really brings attention to those tropey, stereotypical visual techniques that are used.
I walked the streets for hours that night. My mind was reeling. I felt alone, adrift. I'd never murdered anyone before. I had so many questions. How long was I supposed to walk the streets? How much guilt was I supposed to be feeling? How long would those signs float over my head? I wasn't ready to stop talking to myself yet, so I figured I might be better company if I had a couple drinks.
What are you having?
Scotch. I just couldn't get Rita out of my mind. I wanted to see her, talk to her, hold her, touch her.
She ain't worth it.
Yeah, but you don't know her.
All women are the same. You can't trust them.
You're wrong about that. I trust Rita. I have to trust her, right? I just killed a guy for her.
I don't know, man. Sound like a setup to me.
Oh, it's great to see Moonlighting again. Always great to visit an old friend. But let's move on now to complex stories with unhappy endings. Film noir thrives on complex, twisting narratives where morality is blurred and fate is unforgiving. Stories unfold through unreliable narrators, flashbacks, and intricate plots, usually of betrayal. Unlike Hollywood's typical happy endings, noir often leaves characters doomed, trapped by their own choices, trapped by their deceptions, or a cruel, indifferent world where justice just doesn't prevail and the miscommunications and lies just propel that protagonist deeper into that despair. Imagine a man hardened by life, weighed down by his past mistakes. Then he meets her, that femme fatale. She's gorgeous, she's beautiful, mysterious, and obviously dangerous. And he knows she's trouble, but he's drawn to her. They're always drawn to her, whether by desire or something darker. But soon he is caught up in her web, and maybe she convinces him, maybe he convinces himself, as in the case of Walter Neff. But one way or another, he takes a step he can't undo. But then there's always a husband or a lover. Someone stands in the way, and before he knows it, he's plotting, he's deceiving, he maybe is even killing. And in the world of film noir, this never ends well. Like, the lies unravel, loyalties are tested, and in the end, someone and maybe everyone falls. That's the essence of classic noir tale: temptation, betrayal, and inevitably doom. I've listed 3 really well-known examples of film noir here, and each film presents intricate plots driven by deception, fatal attraction, and moral ambiguity. Double Indemnity unfolds through a meticulous murder scheme. that spirals into paranoia and betrayal. The Maltese Falcon layers manipulation within manipulation, leaving its detective protagonist morally jaded and ultimately empty-handed. And Out of the Past from 1947 navigates a doomed escape from past sins, ending in inevitable tragedy. And these three films embody noir's intricate storytellings, non-linear structures, unreliable narrators, and shifting allegiances. And these narrative structures culminate in these bleak endings, whether through death, disillusionment, or moral decay. Their protagonists never really find redemption, reinforcing film noir's cynical worldview where fate is inescapable and no one truly wins. Unless you're private detective Philip Marlowe. Unlike most film noir films, The Big Sleep from 1946 offers a rare, happy-ish ending. While the plot is still filled with crime, with deception, and that moral ambiguity, Philip Marlowe, played by Humphrey Bogart, remains in control, outwitting criminals and avoiding a tragic fate. Unlike doomed protagonists in Double Indemnity and from Out of the Past, Philip Marlowe ends the film alive, victorious, and in a romantic relationship with Vivian, Lauren Bacall. Though the narrative is famously complex, its resolution lacks that fatalistic despair typical of noir, and instead the film leans into its witty banter and chemistry, making it one of the genre's probably most upbeat examples. So noir's visual style creates tension and psychological depth. Shadows symbolize moral corruption, and urban settings evoke isolation. Visionary directors like John Huston and Billy Wilder mastered these techniques using shadow and light to create psychological tension, together with cinematographers using low-key lighting to heighten suspense. The use of chiaroscuro to create dark contrasts and shadows can capture the dark side of American life and can be used to create a sense of mystery and suspense. So high contrast aesthetics, complex stories with unhappy endings all need these archetypal characters to connect to the audience and link all those themes together. Archetypal characters define film noir's dark, fatalistic world. The femme fatale embodies danger and desire, leading men to ruin, while the hard-boiled detective provides a cynical yet moral perspective. The doomed protagonist reflects noir's fatalism, often trapped by fate or poor decisions. These recurring figures establish noir's atmosphere of mistrust, of corruption, and existential despair. Their predictability allows filmmakers to experiment with complex narratives, reinforcing noir's themes of betrayal, moral ambiguity, and that inevitable downfall. They are reliable characters, they rarely change, and are iconic in their representations of those character traits. Let's start with the hard-boiled detective, which is noir's flawed hero. He is cynical, street smart, and navigates corruption and deception. Philip Marlowe, who I mentioned before, played by Humphrey Bogart in The Big Sleep, exemplifies the archetype. He's tough, but he's not invulnerable, but very much guided by his own moral code, despite existing in a corrupt world. Now, with regards to Double Indemnity, we've got Barton Keyes. He's not a detective, but he is an insurance claims investigator who suspects that something doesn't quite add up on that Dietrichson death. and constantly refers to his little man in his gut, his inner voice, I guess, that helps him identify fraudulent claims. So although not a hard-boiled detective, as an insurance investigator, investigating things and figuring out the truth is core to that character. And how good is this gif of Phyllis that I found? And we will talk about Phyllis in more detail coming up, especially when it comes to the Hays Code. But the femme fatale is a staple of film noir. She is intelligent, she is alluring, and often leads the protagonist to his downfall. Phyllis Dietrichson from Double Indemnity is a textbook example, using her charm to manipulate Walter into murder. Her power lies in her ability to control men through seduction, ultimately leading to their destruction. And the doomed anti-hero is another noir staple, often trapped by their own choices. Walter Neff in Double Indemnity believes he is in control, but his fate is sealed from the moment he sees Phyllis. Noir's protagonists rarely escape their tragic destiny, reinforcing the genre's fatalistic tone. And I love the look on Walter's face in this gif. He looks like he's got it all. He knows it all. He's got it all figured out. The world revolves around Walter. Little does he know the impact that his Phyllis is having on him.
It was a hot afternoon, and I can still remember the smell of honeysuckle all along that street. How could I have known that murder can sometimes smell like honeysuckle? Maybe you would have known, Keys, the minute she mentioned accident insurance. But I didn't. I felt like a million.
So there we have it. We've covered all three things. Film noir is defined by its striking high contrast aesthetics, intricate narratives with bleak resolutions, and those iconic archetypal characters. These elements craft a world of cynicism, of fatalism and moral ambiguity, where justice is elusive and betrayal inevitable. Noir's pessimistic tone and inescapable doom set it apart as cinema's darkest genre. And as we continue this discussion, we could probably ask at this stage, does noir reflect a grim reality, or is it a cautionary tale that exposes humanity's deepest flaws and moral complexities? And of course, when discussing that, we also have two important contexts to keep in mind. The time when the film was released and the time within which we watch it, because the context of both influence and impacts how we understand the intention of film noir and its impact. In the shadowy world of film noir, morality is never black and white, unlike the film that we're watching. It exists in a murky grey where corruption, betrayal, existential despair define the human experience. Right and wrong blur, leaving behind only a harsh reality of characters trying to survive. Its characters are deeply flawed. Hard-boiled detectives, cynical anti-heroes, and those enigmatic femme fatales, all trapped in this relentless cycle of crime, deception, and ambition, doomed ambition. And they roam around a world where loyalty is fleeting. Trust is a dangerous illusion in film noir. Visually, high contrast lighting and deep shadows carve out a sense of isolation, while those rain-slick streets, flickering neon signs, claustrophobic alleyways create an urban landscape as unforgiving as the archetypal characters within it. Justice is elusive. Love is cruel, and probably just a game. And fate ties that all together as that relentless force pulling all the characters towards their inevitable downfall. And it's no wonder film noir is considered one of the darkest film genres, because it was a stark rejection of Hollywood's optimism. Even under the Hays Code, which was their classification system at the time, even as part of the Hays Code, crime couldn't go unpunished. Noir films still painted a bleak portrait of the world where doing the right thing often came too late or at too great a cost. And in the end, Noir's greatest truth remains that no one escapes that darkness.
How do you do, Mr. Dietrichson? I'm Walter Nett, Pacific All Risk.
Pacific All what?
The Pacific All Risk Insurance Company. It's about some renewals on the automobiles. I've been trying to contact your husband for the past 2 weeks, but he's never in his office.
Is there anything I can do?
The insurance ran out on the 15th. I'd hate to think of you having a smashed fender or something while you're not fully covered.
Perhaps I know what you mean, Mr. Neff. I've just been taking a sunbath.
No pigeons around, I hope. Now, about those policies, Mr. Dietrichson, I hate to take up your time, but...
Oh, that's all right. If you wait till I put something on, I'll be right down. Nettie, show Mr. Neff into the living room.
Where would the living room be?
In there, but they keep the liquor locked up.
It's all right, I'll just carry my own keys. I was thinking about that dame upstairs and the way she had looked at me. And I wanted to see her again, close, without that silly staircase between us.
I wasn't...
Now, that scene I just showed you is incredibly important for what we're about to talk about. The Hays Code, which was instigated in the 1930s and was that set of moral guidelines that censored Hollywood films prohibiting explicit violence, sexual content, and immoral behavior without consequences. So it was okay to show bad things, but there had to be a punishment, I guess. The Hays Code mandated that crime must not pay, good must triumph over evil, and traditional values must be upheld. So film noir cleverly worked around these restrictions using subtext and nuance, symbolism, and fatalistic storytelling. And that scene from Double Indemnity we just viewed is incredibly significant because one of the specific scenes, and these three things coming up were specifically influential on what happened with the Hays Code next. So I'm referring to the scene where Phyllis and Walter start to map out, without saying the words, the crime that Phyllis wants to happen, but more specifically the scene where we are first introduced to Phyllis. Phyllis is naked at the top of the stairs and she's coming down with her exposed ankles wearing a harlot's anklet, and she's still doing up her buttons before she greets the man. All of this tested the limits of the Hays Code, forcing stricter enforcement of Hollywood's moral guidelines. This film's infamous seduction scene, the scene that we just watched, and the scene coming up where they seal the deal, has all been marked by Phyllis's suggestive attire, her flirtatious nature, and the veiled references to murder was shockingly bold for its time. Wilder's use of innuendo, sexual tension, and moral corruption just openly defied the code's demand for moral resolution. The Hays Code forbade explicitly sexual references and crime without consequence. Yet, Double Indemnity revels in moral ambiguity, portraying murderous lovers driven by greed and passion. Phyllis's cold, calculated deception and the film's cynical tone heightened fears of negative audience influence. So as a result, the Hays Code was re-examined and more strictly enforced, tightening censorship of film across the end of the 40s into the 50s. Wilder's daring approach exposed some weaknesses in the code, ultimately contributing to the gradual decline in the 1950s of the Hays Code, but its eventual replacement by the MPAA rating system, which is pretty much the classification system that we have today.
See what I mean, Walter?
Sure, I got good eyesight. You mean you want him to have the policy without him knowing it? And that means without the insurance company knowing that he doesn't know it. That's the setup, isn't it?
Is there anything wrong with it?
No, I think it's lovely. Then if some dark, wet night that crown block did fall on him,
What crown block?
only sometimes it can't quite make it on its own. It has to have a little help.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course, it doesn't have to be a crown block. It can be a car backing over and we could fall out of the upstairs window. Any little thing like that, just so it's a morgue job.
Are you crazy?
Not that crazy. Goodbye, Mrs. Dietrichson.
What's the matter?
Look, baby, you can't get away with it. You want to knock him off, don't you?
That's a horrible thing to say.
What do you think I was, anyway? The guy that walks into a good-looking dame's front parlor and says, "Good afternoon, I sell accident insurance on husbands." You got one that's been around too long, one you'd like to turn into a little hard cash? Just give me a smile and I'll help you collect? Boy, what a dope you must think I am.
I think you're rotten.
I think you're swell, so long as I'm not your husband.
Get out of here.
You bet I'll get out of here, baby. I'll get out of here, but quick. So I let her have it straight between the eyes. She didn't fool me for a minute, not this time. I knew I had hold of a red-hot poker and the time to drop it was before it burned my hand off. I stopped at a drive-in for a bottle of beer, the one I had wanted all along. Only I wanted it worse now to get rid of the sour taste of her iced tea and everything that went with it. I didn't want to go back to the office, so I dropped by a bowling alley at 3rd and Western and rolled a few lines to get my mind thinking about something else for a while. I didn't feel like eating dinner when I left, and I didn't feel like a show. So I drove home, put the car away, and went up to my apartment. It had begun to rain outside, and I watched it get dark and didn't even turn on the light. That didn't help me either. I was all twisted up inside, and I was still holding on to that red-hot poker. And right then it came over me that I hadn't walked out on anything at all. That the hook was too strong. That this wasn't the end between her and me. It was only the beginning. So at 8 o'clock, the bell would ring and I'd know who it was without even having to think. As if it was the most natural thing in the world.
Hello?
And that scene will forever be referred to by film students, film scholars, critics as Walter's red-hot poker scene from Double Indemnity. Part of all the sexual innuendo that drove the censors wild in the late 40s and forced them to really tighten up those rules. While we're having a little bit of fun, and before the end of the presentation, I thought we might do a little bit of a did you know about Double Indemnity. Did you know that the Hays Code strictly prohibited films that justified or glorified crime? Yes, you did, because we just spoke about it. Which means that Double Indemnity nearly didn't make it. The story about murder, adultery, and deception was considered too risque. It took years of script revisions and compromises before the PCA, the Production Code Administration, reluctantly approved it. Did you know that the plot of Double Indemnity is loosely based on the 1927 murder of a man called Albert Snyder by his wife Ruth and her lover? Ruth convinced her lover to kill Albert for his life insurance, which had a double indemnity clause, just like in the film. And of course, double indemnity in insurance terms means that if the death is accidental, then the insurance payment is doubled. Double indemnity. And darling Fred MacMurray, did you know that he was actually known for his light-hearted comedy roles before this film? And he initially rejected the role because he thought it might ruin his career. However, Double Indemnity transformed his image and proved that he was a very versatile actor and could play darker, much more complex characters. And those of you who are my vintage will probably be familiar with Fred MacMurray as Stephen Douglas from the TV series My Three Sons.
My Three Sons. starring Fred MacMurray.
And did you know that, according to some on-set retellings, Barbara Stanwyck was also a little bit hesitant to take on the role. She was very nervous about playing such an unsympathetic femme fatale. And it's probably not quite correct to say Billy Wilder tricked her, but he certainly convinced her by giving her a stern talking to and saying, "Are you a mouse or are you an actress?" And she took that challenge on and delivered one of the greatest performances in noir history. Feminist perspectives on Phyllis Dietrichson from Double Indemnity are multifaceted. Some feminist critics argue that her portrayal as a manipulative femme fatale reinforces those negative stereotypes depicting women as deceitful and dangerous. Conversely, though, others interpret Phyllis as a subversive character, challenging those traditional gender roles, and her assertiveness and pursuit of personal desires can be viewed as acts of defiance against a male-dominated society. These varying interpretations underscore this complexity that is Phyllis's character and her significance in feminist film analysis. I just think she's fantastic. How does it go? If you've got it, flaunt it. So, films influencing real crime. Well, there was a case that involved a woman named Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who, along with her lover, attempted to murder her husband for the insurance money, mirroring the film's plot. Now, that happened the year that Double Indemnity was released, so the link there was pretty juicy for the media to jump onto. But a more well-known case, often linked to Double Indemnity, happened in 1947. Where Bernard F. Finch and his lover conspired to kill his wife for financial gain. So while not directly linked to the actual year the film came out, such crimes reinforce the film's cultural impact and the fears that Hollywood had the potential to influence real-life behavior. And did you know that apparently, according to on-set recollections and Fred MacMurray's own interviews, Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray had fantastic on-screen chemistry and were exceptional great friends, which was essential for that film's tension. Though they had worked together before, their performances in Double Indemnity were among their best. Fred MacMurray actually paid a beautiful tribute to her when he was presented with his Lifetime Achievement Award by the AFI, the American Film Institute. So unlike a few other screen couples, there are no real rumors or allusions to anything more romantically linked, but it was certainly well known in the industry that they had a really strong friendship. I just love that photo of them sitting in the car, their like getaway car, having a quick coffee and a sandwich before filming starts again. They're so delightful.
Well, listen, that trip to Palo Alto, when does he leave?
End of the month.
He drives, huh?
He always drives.
Not this time. You're going to make him take the train.
Why?
Because it's all worked out for a train. Listen, baby, I'm crazy about you, baby.
And I don't want you to hang, baby. Not if there's an insurance company in the picture, baby.
It's getting me just as bad, baby. We're hitting it to the limit, baby.
They're not going to hang you, baby. Look, baby, you can't get away with it.
Get out of here.
You bet I'll get out of here, baby. I'll get out of here, but quick.
So film noir remains one of cinema's most fascinating styles and one of its darkest. Its influence continues to shape storytelling and cinematography today. I thought I might take this opportunity to open the floor for questions before we round off the presentation. I hope this exploration of cinema's darkest genre has given you new insights into its themes, its style, and its impact. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I appreciate your curiosity. So thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of film noir. And as Walter Neff says, it's probably time to shut up, baby.